The morning mist clung to Cedar Falls like secrets. Marcus Williams was teaching his 8-year-old son, Jake, how to identify bird tracks when they found her. Crumpled, bleeding, clutching a shattered iPhone with white knuckles. Her designer dress had been shredded by thorns, silk threads caught on blackberry vines like evidence of a desperate chase. She wasn't camping. She wasn't hiking. She was hiding. When Marcus stepped closer, his carved wooden knife glinting in the dawn light, she didn't scream, didn't run. Instead, she studied the blade with eyes that knew violence intimately. Professional recognition flickered across her bruised face. Jake whispered, "Daddy, why does the pretty lady look so scared?" Marcus calmly set the knife down, feeling ice crawl up his spine, because in that moment of mutual recognition, he realized this wasn't just some lost hiker who'd stumbled into his quiet life. This woman had secrets that could destroy everything he'd built in this peaceful mountain town. And somehow she knew he had secrets too. What she whispered to Max made Ethan's blood freeze solid. By morning, everything would change in ways he never imagined. The morning sun struggled through autumn clouds as Ethan adjusted his Navy security uniform in the mirror. 2 years. 2 years since Sarah's Honda had spun out on black ice, leaving him to navigate parenthood alone. The accident replayed in his mind most mornings. The phone call, the hospital, the terrible silence that followed. He pushed the memory down, focusing instead on the day ahead. Max sat at the kitchen table, arranging his colored pencils in perfect rows of 6. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. Always the same order, always exactly 6. "Ready for school, buddy?" Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer. Max rarely spoke before 10 a.m., his autism making mornings particularly challenging. The boy's fingers traced invisible patterns on the table, a self-soothing ritual Ethan had learned not to interrupt. Outside, the school bus wheezed to a stop, and Max gathered his supplies with mechanical precision. No eye contact, no goodbye kiss, just a small nod that meant everything and nothing at once. Hollow Creek Elementary buzzed with the controlled chaos of morning routines. Ethan took his position by the main entrance, watching children stream past like colorful fish. He spotted Max immediately, the boy who walked alone, who ate lunch alone, who lived in his own remarkable world. Other children avoided him, not from cruelty, but from simple incomprehension. Max was different, and different made people uncomfortable in a town like Hollow Creek. Principal Helen Carter approached with her trademark tight smile. 55 years old, iron gray hair pulled into a severe bun, she ruled the school with bureaucratic efficiency. Her polyester blazer never wrinkled, her clipboard never empty. "Mr. Cole, we need to discuss Max again." The words carried the weight of inevitability. "The district has excellent special programs, resources we simply can't provide here." She spoke in euphemisms, but Ethan heard the truth underneath. Max didn't fit their mold, and they wanted him gone. The day dragged with familiar rhythms. Ethan walked his rounds, ensuring doors stayed locked, strangers stayed out, and the illusion of safety remained intact. His military training made the work automatic. Scan for threats, assess situations, maintain vigilance. But his real focus stayed on Max, visible through classroom windows, sitting apart from his peers. Jake was everything now, bright and curious, with Sarah's infectious laugh and Marcus's careful way of observing the world before acting. The boy had inherited his mother's artistic eye and his father's steady hands, creating drawings that filled every wall of their cabin with color and life. He'd started asking fewer questions about Mommy lately, but he still drew pictures of their family of 3, always including Sarah with angel wings and a smile that could light up the darkest days. The old establishment sat on Main Street like a relic from another era, its red vinyl booths and checkered floor unchanged since the 1950s. Most families avoided the place, too greasy, too outdated, too populated by Hollow Creek's forgotten residents. But Max found comfort in its predictability, and Ethan found peace in his son's rare moments of contentment. They claimed their usual booth as the homeless woman watched from her corner perch. Something about her lingered in Ethan's mind, a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit the obvious picture. That night, as Max slept surrounded by his carefully arranged drawings, Ethan stood in the doorway watching his son's peaceful face. The boy who struggled with human connection, who saw the world through different eyes, who carried a light most people couldn't recognize. When she finally opened her eyes fully, Marcus was cleaning cuts on her hands with the gentle precision of a field medic, his touch professional but kind. She flinched at first contact, then gradually relaxed when she saw Jake coloring quietly at the kitchen table, his tongue poking out in concentration as he worked on a dragon that breathed rainbow fire. The domestic scene seemed to calm her in ways that words couldn't, as if she'd forgotten such simple peace was possible. "Excuse me." The woman's voice cut through the diner's ambient noise. She approached their table with hesitant steps, her gaze fixed on Max's drawing. "Your son has remarkable talent." The words emerged with careful articulation, not the slurred speech Ethan expected from someone living rough. Max looked up, making brief eye contact before returning to his artwork. The woman studied the napkin with genuine interest, her head tilted in a way that suggested professional assessment rather than casual observation. "Thank you," Ethan replied, uncertain how to navigate this unexpected interaction. The woman's appearance remained disheveled, but something in her manner commanded attention. She pulled a small box of colored pencils from her coat pocket. Expensive ones, Ethan noted, hardly standard equipment for the homeless. "These might help," she said, placing them beside Max's napkin. The boy's eyes widened with delight as he examined each pencil, his fingers tracing their smooth surfaces with reverence. "I'm Lorraine," the woman said, settling uninvited into their booth. Her proximity revealed more contradictions: soft hands despite the rough living, teeth that suggested regular dental care, a faint scent of soap beneath the street grime. Max began drawing with the new pencils, his movements fluid and confident. Colors bloomed across the napkin in patterns that seemed chaotic, but felt purposeful. Lorraine watched with the intensity of someone seeing profound beauty in apparent randomness. "How do you know about art?" Ethan asked, genuine curiosity overriding his usual caution. Lorraine's smile carried shadows of old pain. "Everyone has something they used to be," she replied cryptically. "Max sees the world differently than most people. That's not a disadvantage. It's a gift." When Jake asked if she could teach him to draw better, Elena glanced at Marcus uncertainly, seeking permission she wasn't sure she had the right to request. "If your dad says it's okay," she said carefully. Marcus found himself nodding, though warning bells chimed in the back of his mind like radar detecting incoming missiles and sails. Nothing about this woman's story added up to anything approaching truth, but Jake hadn't smiled this much since Sarah died, and that was worth a certain amount of calculated risk. Elena returned the next day, then the day after that, settling into a routine that felt deceptively normal. She never mentioned leaving, never talked about where she'd come from or where she planned to go next. Her presence became part of their daily rhythm, like she'd always belonged there, helping with breakfast, teaching Jake advanced drawing techniques, listening to Marcus's stories about local wildlife, with the kind of focused attention that made him feel genuinely heard for the first time in years. Marcus caught her staring at his work with an artist's appreciation, pointing out techniques that revealed far more formal training than any casual hobby would provide. When she helped Jake with his drawings, her gentle patience and professional insight reminded Marcus painfully of Sarah's way with children. But unlike his wife, Elena jumped at every unexpected sound, her eyes going hard and alert in ways that spoke of learned vigilance and intimate familiarity with violence. During quiet moments when Jake was occupied with his toys, Marcus noticed other telling details. The way Elena automatically sat with her back to walls, never allowing anyone to approach from behind. How she knew exactly where he kept his first aid kit without being shown, locating supplies with the efficiency of someone trained in emergency medicine. The faint tan line on her ring finger from a wedding band recently removed, and the expensive watch she wore that cost more than most people made in 6 months. Most telling of all was how she watched him work with tools, recognizing skill that went far beyond weekend carpentry or artistic hobby. She was cataloging his abilities the same way he was cataloging hers, each of them taking mental notes about the other's capabilities and potential threat level. Two predators pretending to be house cats, circling each other carefully while maintaining the fiction of domestic tranquility for Jake's sake. After dropping Max at school, he drove to the railroad bridge, where Hollow Creek's homeless population gathered in makeshift camps. He found Lorraine's shelter tucked beneath the concrete overhang, a careful construction of cardboard and tarps that suggested engineering knowledge. But what stopped Ethan cold were the contents visible through the shelter's opening. Stacks of books on child psychology and developmental disorders. Academic journals with subscription labels still attached. A framed diploma from Stanford University. Cracked but readable. Dr. Lorraine Mitchell, Ph.D. in educational psychology. The homeless woman who had captivated his son was once a decorated academic. "You shouldn't be here." Lorraine's voice emerged from behind him, startling Ethan from his investigation. She approached with wary steps, her defensive posture betraying vulnerability beneath the defiance. "Tell me about Jake's mother," she said quietly, while the boy played with his wooden trains in the living room, his imagination creating elaborate stories about brave conductors and magical destinations. Her question was carefully casual, but Marcus heard the deeper need underneath, the hunger for connection and understanding that came from too many months of isolation and fear. Marcus's hand stilled on the bird he was carving, his expression growing soft with memory and old grief. "Sarah was everything good in the world," he said simply, his voice carrying the weight of love that death couldn't diminish. "She taught kindergarten at the local school, volunteered at the animal shelter every weekend, made the best apple pie in 3 counties, and never met a stray creature she wouldn't bring home to heal. She fought cancer for 2 years with more courage than any soldier I ever served with." His voice caught slightly on the last word, the slip so small, Elena almost missed it. "Almost." "You were in the military," she said, and it wasn't a question but a statement of recognition, one professional to another. Marcus looked up from his carving, meeting her eyes directly for the first time since she'd arrived. "Army," he lied smoothly, the cover story he'd used for 3 years rolling off his tongue with practiced ease. "Nothing special, just did my time and came home to start a family." Elena nodded, accepting the deflection because they both understood the rules of their particular game. Everyone had secrets. The smart ones kept them buried deep. But something flickered in her eyes as she looked at his hands again, noting calluses in specific places, scars that told stories he'd never shared with anyone in Cedar Falls. The way he held his knife, the unconscious way he positioned himself to maintain sightlines to all exits, the controlled economy of his movements that spoke of combat training far beyond basic military service. "Thank you for letting me be part of this," she whispered, gesturing toward Jake's laughter drifting in from the next room. "I forgot what normal families felt like." The moment stretched between them, fragile and dangerous as spun glass. Marcus wanted to ask about the fear that never left her eyes, about the expensive phone she kept checking compulsively, about the nightmares that made her cry out in her sleep, according to Mrs. Patterson, who ran the bed and breakfast where Elena was supposedly staying. Instead, he carved another delicate feather into his wooden bird, thinking about the loaded pistol hidden in his bedroom closet and wondering if Elena was thinking about weapons, too. Marcus was black, attending a predominantly white school where his differences were met with suspicion rather than celebration. The administration wanted him removed, Lorraine continued, her voice growing stronger with anger at the memory. They claimed he was disruptive, unable to learn in traditional settings. I fought for him, documented his abilities, proved his potential. When they persisted, I went public. Her academic career had crumbled within months. The school district's legal team painted her as a radical activist, prioritizing politics over pedagogy. Colleagues distanced themselves, funding disappeared, and eventually the university asked for her resignation. I lost everything, Lorraine concluded. My position, my research, my reputation. But Marcus? He's at MIT now, studying architecture. Sometimes the fight is worth the cost. She's just visiting, buddy, he said gently, though the words felt like lies on his tongue. She'll have to go home eventually. Jake looked up with Sarah's serious brown eyes, the kind of direct gaze that saw through adult deceptions with uncomfortable clarity. But what if this is her home now? He asked. What if she wants to stay with us forever and ever? The question hung in the air like smoke, impossible to dismiss and dangerous to answer honestly. Elena's facade began cracking during her second week of daily visits, small fissures that only someone with Marcus's training would notice. He found her staring at his carving knife with an expression he recognized from combat zones, the look of someone automatically calculating how to turn anything into a weapon if the need arose. She startled when Jake dropped a book upstairs, her hand moving instinctively toward her purse before she caught herself and forced a smile. When a delivery truck backfired on the main road half a mile away, Elena was on her feet and moving toward the back exit before the sound even registered consciously with Marcus and Jake. Her reaction time was impressive, trained, the kind of response that came from months or years of living under constant threat. She covered her slip by claiming she thought she heard thunder and was worried about getting caught in another storm, but Marcus wasn't buying the explanation. "Lady, your wound tighter than a spring," Marcus observed one afternoon, watching Elena jump at a squirrel's movement in the trees outside the workshop window. She tried to smile, the expression not quite reaching her eyes despite her obvious effort. "I'm just naturally anxious," she said, but her tells were becoming more obvious by the day. The way she positioned small mirrors to watch approaches to the cabin, how she always knew exactly how many people were in Murphy's diner when they grabbed lunch together, the practiced way she scanned crowds for threats while maintaining casual conversation. Marcus began testing her, casually mentioning tactical concepts disguised as woodworking techniques, dropping military terminology into discussions about joinery and grain patterns. Elena responded with knowledge she shouldn't possess, unless she'd received training far beyond civilian art classes, using terminology that belonged in briefing rooms rather than craft workshops. When she automatically corrected Jake's grip on a carving tool, she did it with the expertise of someone who'd trained others in proper weapon handling, her hands guiding his with precision that spoke of muscle memory and professional instruction. Her cover story was dissolving like sugar in rain, and they both knew it. The question was whether they'd acknowledge the truth or continue their careful dance around the deceptions that kept them both safe from questions neither was prepared to answer. Marcus found himself hoping they could maintain the fiction indefinitely, preserving the fragile peace they'd built in their mountain sanctuary. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when Marcus decided to show Elena his workshop's hidden compartment, revealing advanced equipment that had nothing to do with carpentry or artistic pursuits. Night vision goggles still in their military cases, tactical knives with serrated edges designed for combat rather than crafting, communication equipment sophisticated enough to reach anywhere in the world, and maps marked with coordinates that corresponded to no tourist destinations. Elena stared at the cache of equipment, her face going pale as she recognized items she'd seen before in very different contexts. "You're not just ex-army?" she breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus met her eyes steadily, no longer bothering to maintain his cover story now that the truth was spreading between them like wildfire. "Navy SEAL. Team 6. 22 years of service before I came home to bury my wife." He paused, letting that information settle. "And you're not just some artist running from a bad divorce, are you, Elena?" The pretense shattered between them like breaking glass, sharp and irreversible. Elena's hands shook as she reached into her purse, pulling out items that explained everything and changed everything. A small digital recorder, a flash drive, and a federal badge in a leather case that identified her as Eleanor Morrison, not Eleanor Brooks. Married name Blackwood. "My real name is Eleanor Morrison," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her fingers. "I was married to Senator Richard Blackwood for 5 years. 3 months ago I discovered he's been selling classified defense contracts to foreign bidders, compromising national security for personal profit." She held up the flash drive like it contained fire instead of data. "The evidence is all here. Everything the FBI needs to put him away forever, along with half his staff and 3 major defense contractors who've been paying for information that gets our soldiers killed." Her voice dropped to a whisper that carried the weight of terrible knowledge. "But Richard has connections everywhere. Private military contractors, ex-CIA operatives, people who specialize in making problems disappear without a trace." Her answer seemed to satisfy him, though his drawing that evening carried darker tones than usual, storm clouds gathering over stick-figure families. Ethan walked them home that night, consumed by helpless frustration. Sarah's death had taught him how quickly life could steal away the people who mattered most. Now, just as Max had found someone who understood him, circumstances threatened to tear that connection apart. The universe seemed determined to test their family's resilience, to see how much loss they could absorb before breaking completely. In his darkest moments, Ethan wondered if they were destined to face every challenge alone. The next morning brought crisis in an unexpected form. Ethan arrived at work to find Principal Carter waiting with a grim expression and a manila folder thick with documentation. "We've made our decision about Max," she announced without preamble. "They haven't yet," she said, then corrected herself. "They hadn't until yesterday. I've been running for weeks, staying ahead by constantly moving, never staying anywhere more than 2 or 3 days. But I got comfortable here. I let my guard down because for the first time in months, I felt safe. I felt like I could breathe." She looked toward the house where Jake's laughter could be heard even through the workshop walls. "I felt like I could have a family again. This is what's best for Max and for our other students." The finality of her words struck Ethan like physical blows. In 4 days, his son would be exemplared from normal childhood, labeled and segregated because his differences made others uncomfortable. That afternoon, Ethan found himself racing toward the homeless camp with desperate urgency. He needed Lorraine's expertise, her professional knowledge, her understanding of Max's true capabilities. But when he arrived at her shelter, he discovered it empty except for a handwritten note. "Gone to make things right. Trust me with Max. Trust yourself. Some battles require strategic retreat before victory." The cryptic message left him more confused than reassured. Hours later, as evening approached and Max waited at their usual booth in Rosie's diner, Lorraine appeared with a large portfolio tucked under her arm. Her appearance had transformed dramatically. Clean clothes, washed hair, an aura of professional competence that had been hidden beneath her homeless disguise. Max's face lit up with joy at seeing her, oblivious to the adult complications surrounding their relationship. "I have something to show you both," Lorraine said, opening her portfolio to reveal detailed assessments, educational plans, and artistic evaluations. For 3 days, she'd been documenting Max's abilities through careful observation and informal testing. The results painted a picture of exceptional talent masked by unconventional learning patterns. Max isn't behind his peers. He's years ahead in visual spatial intelligence, pattern recognition, and creative problem-solving. The documentation was comprehensive and professionally prepared, complete with recommendations for specialized educational approaches that would nurture rather than suppress Max's unique gifts. Lorraine had consulted with former colleagues, researched innovative programs, and developed a framework for advocating Max's educational rights. "I've seen children like Max before," she explained. "With proper support, they don't just succeed, they excel beyond anyone's expectations." "But you're going back to Stanford," Ethan said, voicing the fear that had haunted him since Dr. Steinberg's visit. Lorraine's smile carried knowledge of decisions already made. "I turned down their offer," she replied simply. "Some things matter more than career rehabilitation. Max needs an advocate, and I need a purpose worth fighting for. We can build something better here, together." Outside, a black SUV with tinted windows drove slowly past the cabin, its occupants invisible behind glass, dark as midnight. Elena went rigid, every muscle coiled for flight, while Marcus moved to the window with deceptive casualness. His trained eye automatically catalogued details, government plates that could be legitimate or expertly forged, 2 occupants in the front seats, passenger holding something that could be binoculars or a long-range camera, vehicle moving at surveillance speed rather than tourist pace. The administrators found themselves confronting expert testimony that challenged their comfortable assumptions. The meeting stretched for 2 hours as Lorraine systematically dismantled the district's rationale for Max's transfer. She cited research studies, legal precedents, and educational best practices with the fluency of someone who'd spent decades in academic circles. When questioned about her own qualifications, she acknowledged her recent struggles with unflinching honesty, then pivoted to Marcus Thompson's success as evidence of her method's effectiveness. Principal Carter's resistance gradually crumbled under the weight of professional scrutiny. The district's special education director, Dr. Margaret Foster, began asking substantive questions about alternative approaches to Max's education. By meeting's end, they'd agreed to a trial period of modified instruction within the mainstream classroom, with Lorraine serving as an unpaid educational consultant to monitor Max's progress and recommend adjustments. Walking home from the school district building, Ethan felt lighter than he had in months. Max's immediate future was secure, his potential finally recognized by the people charged with nurturing it. But more importantly, they'd found an advocate who understood the battle from both professional and personal perspectives. Lorraine had sacrificed her Stanford opportunity to fight for one special child, a choice that spoke to her character more eloquently than any academic achievement. That evening at Rosie's diner, the atmosphere felt celebratory despite the modest surroundings. Max worked on a new drawing with focused intensity, incorporating techniques Lorraine had taught him over their brief but intensive collaboration. The artwork showed remarkable sophistication for a 10-year-old, complex layering, innovative use of color, emotional depth that transcended simple representation. Watching his son create with such confidence and joy, Ethan finally understood what Lorraine had recognized from the beginning. "What happens now?" he asked as Max proudly displayed his finished drawing, a portrait of 3 people sitting together in a diner booth, their faces turned toward a bright window. Lorraine studied the artwork with the intensity she brought to everything involving Max's development. "Now we build something new," she replied. "A different kind of family, a different kind of education, a different kind of hope." 2 weeks passed in a blur of positive changes. Elena started to protest, part of her desperate to stay and fight beside him, but Marcus cut her off with a look that reminded her exactly who she was dealing with. "This is what I do, what I've always done, what I trained for 22 years to do perfectly." He checked his rifle with movements so practiced they seemed like breathing. "Trust me to protect what matters most to both of us. There are 4 of them," Marcus said, his voice taking on the clinical tone of an operational briefing. "They'll approach from 3 directions to minimize our escape options, leaving 1 man with the vehicle as backup and communications. Standard elimination protocol for high-value targets in rural environments." Elena stared at him, finally seeing the killer he'd hidden beneath layers of domestic tranquility. The man who could analyze death like weather patterns and plan violence like dinner menus. "You're not just protecting me," she realized, understanding flooding through her with terrible clarity. "You're protecting Jake from finding out who his father really is, from seeing what you can do when people threaten your family." Marcus nodded once, sharp and economical, then moved toward the door with purpose that would have terrified her if she hadn't been so grateful for it. The first shot shattered the cabin's front window, sending glass exploding across the living room where Jake had been playing with his trains just minutes before. Marcus was already moving, pushing Elena toward the back door as automatic weapons fire erupted from the forest he'd called home for 3 years. "Go!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos with absolute authority. "Now!" Elena grabbed Jake from his hiding spot in the pantry, the boy confused and frightened as she carried him through the gathering dusk toward the neighbor's house. Behind them, the cabin that had felt like home for the first time in years erupted into warfare. Marcus moved through his own house like a ghost, using every advantage the familiar territory provided, every defensive position he'd planned but hoped never to need. He'd spent 3 years preparing for this moment while praying it would never come. Hidden firing positions throughout the property, reinforced walls that could stop rifle rounds, escape routes Jake didn't know existed, weapons caches positioned for maximum tactical advantage. The men hunting Elena were professionals, well-trained and expensively equipped, but they were operating on his ground now, and Marcus Williams had never lost a firefight on his own territory. The battle lasted 17 minutes by Marcus's count, 17 minutes of controlled violence that felt both endless and instantaneous. When silence finally returned to the pine forest, 4 men lay dead around the cabin's perimeter, their expensive equipment scattered among the pine needles like discarded toys. Marcus emerged from the tree line, checking each body with methodical thoroughness, confirming kills with the same attention to detail he'd brought to wood carving. Professional killers, all of them, with government-quality weapons and communication gear that cost more than most people's cars. But they'd made one critical error in their planning and execution. They'd threatened his son. In Marcus's world, where love and violence lived side by side like old companions, that was an unforgivable mistake that could only be answered one way. Elena found him sitting on the cabin's front steps, rifle disassembled and being cleaned with automatic precision, his hands steady as a surgeon's, despite having just killed 4 human beings. Jake was safe at the Murphy's house, told that bad men had tried to hurt their friend Eleanor, and Daddy had scared them away like heroes did in his favorite movies. The boy didn't need to know that his gentle father had taken 4 lives to protect their makeshift family. Didn't need to carry that weight in his young heart. "It's not over," Elena said quietly, her own medical training kicking in as she checked Marcus for injuries with hands that knew where to look for hidden wounds. "Richard will send more when these don't report back. Better ones. with more resources and fewer mistakes. Marcus nodded, accepting her touch as she cleaned a graze on his forearm that he'd sustained during the firefight. The wound minor, but needing attention before infection could set in. "Agent Chen is sending federal marshals from Portland," Elena continued, her voice steady, despite the magnitude of what they'd just survived. "Full protection detail with orders to transport us to a secure facility until trial. Jake, too, if you'll come with me." She paused, meeting his eyes directly for the first time since the shooting stopped. "I know what I'm asking. I know what it means to leave this life behind." Marcus looked at the cabin where he'd built a peaceful existence, now scarred by bullet holes and broken glass that would never fully heal. Jake's drawings were scattered across the floor, innocent family pictures stained with the reality of violence that had followed Elena into their sanctuary. "I swore I'd never go back to that world," he said, his voice carrying the weight of promises made to a dying woman. "When Sarah was diagnosed, when we knew the cancer was winning, I promised her Jake would have a normal childhood. A father who came home every night, who carved wooden toys instead of planning missions, who never had to explain why men with guns wanted to hurt people he loved." Elena knelt beside him on the steps, her hand covering his scarred knuckles with a touch that was both gentle and strong. "Sometimes protecting the people we love means accepting help when it's offered, even when that help comes with a price we don't want to pay." She looked toward the Murphys' house where Jake was probably drawing pictures of the adventure he thought he'd just survived. "He needs you alive more than he needs you to be the man you were before tonight." The decision ultimately came down to Jake, as Marcus had known it would from the moment Eleanor appeared in their lives. When the federal marshals arrived in their armored vehicles with bulletproof vests and grim expressions, when they began photographing the crime scene and bagging evidence with professional efficiency, his 8-year-old son looked at the destruction surrounding their home and asked a single question that cut through every tactical consideration. "Are we still going to be a family?" More importantly, Stanford had requested permission to study their methods for potential implementation across the university's teacher training programs. "Seems we can change the world from Hollow Creek after all." Max looked up from his drawing, a detailed portrait of Marcus Thompson working at a drafting table, created from photographs and video calls with the young man who had inspired Lorraine's advocacy. The artwork showed remarkable emotional depth, capturing not just physical likeness, but the subject's intense concentration and creative joy. "Is Marcus proud of us?" Max asked, with the directness that had become his trademark. "Very proud," Lorraine replied, scrolling through messages on her phone. "He's designing a community center for his senior project at MIT, specifically focused on spaces where neurodivergent children can learn and create. He wants to visit next month to see our program in action." The possibility of meeting his hero had Max practically glowing with excitement, his artistic confidence having grown to match his natural talent. As they walked home through Hollow Creek's quiet streets, Ethan felt a profound sense of completion that had nothing to do with endings and everything to do with beginnings. The limousine that had once threatened to steal their happiness now seemed like just another chapter in a story that was still being written. Sarah's presence felt less like absence and more like blessing, her memory woven into the new life they were building together. Max skipped ahead, his backpack bouncing with each step, pausing occasionally to examine interesting shadows or architectural details that might inspire future artworks. His world had expanded far beyond the limitations others had tried to impose, revealing possibilities that most people never imagined. Watching his son embrace life with such enthusiasm, Ethan finally understood that healing didn't mean forgetting the past. It meant having the courage to build something beautiful from whatever remained. At their front door, Lorraine paused as she had every evening for the past 3 months, still technically living in her apartment above the art store, but spending most waking hours as part of their makeshift family. "Thank you," she said simply, her words carrying the weight of someone who had been offered a second chance at purpose and belonging. The house that had once echoed with emptiness now hummed with conversation, laughter, and the comfortable silence of people who understood each other without explanation. That night, as Max arranged his colored pencils in their familiar pattern, and Lorraine reviewed lesson plans at the kitchen table, Ethan stood in the doorway observing this new version of family. It looked nothing like what he had planned, bore no resemblance to conventional structures, and yet felt more complete than anything he had previously imagined. They were three people who had found each other through circumstances that could have destroyed them, choosing instead to build something unprecedented and beautiful. The future stretched ahead with possibilities that none of them could have anticipated 6 months earlier. Max would continue growing into his artistic gifts, his advocacy work, inspiring educational reforms across the country. They'd spent those months in a federal safe house in Montana, a location that reminded Marcus of Cedar Falls, but with federal agents instead of friendly neighbors providing security. The landscape was similar enough to feel like home, but different enough to represent the new beginning they were building together one careful day at a time. Elena slowly let go of the fear that had defined her existence since leaving Richard, while Marcus learned to trust in safety he'd never expected to find again. Some stories end with dramatic revelations or sweeping resolutions. Others conclude with the quiet recognition that healing happens gradually, one day at a time, in the small moments when wounded people choose to stay and build something beautiful together. This was that kind of story, not about rescue or salvation, but about three imperfect people who found in each other the courage to keep growing, keep hoping, and keep creating meaning from whatever materials life had left them. And in Hollow Creek, Montana, where autumn painted the sky in impossible colors and a small diner served as sanctuary for dreamers and artists, that was more than enough. It was everything. Elena had nightmares the first few weeks, waking up screaming Richard's name while her body fought battles that existed only in memory and trauma. Marcus would hold her until the shaking stopped, sharing his own struggles with post-traumatic stress in quiet conversations after Jake fell asleep. They were both warriors healing from different kinds of combat, learning to trust in safety they'd never expected to find, building intimacy from shared understanding of what it meant to carry invisible wounds. Love grew slowly between them during those Montana months, built on shared understanding rather than passion, on trust earned through crisis rather than romance discovered in peace. They were both too damaged for fairy tale endings, too experienced with violence for simple happiness, but they found something deeper and more durable in their mutual commitment to healing and protection. Jake was the bridge that connected them, but their bond grew beyond their shared love for the boy into something that could survive whatever storms the future might bring. The wood-carving knife sat on the mantelpiece of their temporary home, no longer a tool or weapon, but a symbol of transformation that reminded them how far they'd traveled from that morning in the woods. Marcus had carved their initials into its wooden handle during long Montana evenings, while Elena sketched plans for the art therapy program she wanted to start for military families dealing with trauma and transition. Jake had added his own artwork to the knife's wooden sheath, bright dragons protecting the blade that had once protected them all from forces that wanted to tear their family apart. Their return to Cedar Falls was different but familiar, like coming home to a place that had grown and changed in their absence. The cabin had been rebuilt exactly as it was before, but stronger, with reinforced walls and security systems that would make any future attack significantly more difficult. Elena's art therapy center occupied the renovated barn, where she helped other families navigate the complex emotions of military life and civilian transition, creating safe spaces for healing through creative expression. Veterans came from 3 counties away to carve wood and paint pictures, finding peace in creating beauty instead of destroying targets, learning to channel their training and discipline into artistic expression rather than tactical planning. Children drew their fathers as both protectors and gentle artists, understanding through Elena's guidance that people could be complicated and contradictory and still be heroes worthy of love and respect. Marcus still woke before dawn, still brewed coffee in his grandfather's old percolator, still watched his family sleep peacefully in the expanded cabin they'd made their own. But now Elena curled against his side, her breathing deep and untroubled by the nightmares that had once stolen her rest. Jake's loft bedroom had been expanded to accommodate his growing collection of art supplies and model airplanes, dreams that stretched beyond survival into genuine childhood wonder and ambition. The boy called Eleanor Mom now, not because anyone had suggested it or insisted upon it, but because the word had emerged naturally from their daily interactions, like flowers blooming in spring soil. She packed his lunches with notes that made him smile, attended parent-teacher conferences with the same fierce attention she'd once devoted to gathering evidence against government corruption, and tucked him in at night with stories that featured dragons who protected families rather than hoarding treasure. The Saturday farmers' market knew them as the artistic family who sold beautiful carvings and taught free drawing lessons to children whose parents couldn't afford art classes. Elena's paintings of mountain landscapes and family portraits found eager buyers among tourists seeking authentic local art, while her income from consulting with federal agencies on fraud detection provided the financial security that let them choose their projects based on passion rather than necessity. Marcus's woodcarving grew more intricate and expressive, incorporating techniques Elena suggested that blended traditional craftsmanship with contemporary artistic vision. Their collaboration created pieces that were both functional and emotionally resonant, items that people bought not just for their beauty, but for the stories they seemed to tell about love, surviving impossible odds, and families forming in unexpected ways. Sometimes, late at night when Jake was sleeping safely in his room, Marcus would find Elena standing at their bedroom window, looking out at the forest that had once hidden her deepest fears and most desperate hopes. "Regrets?" he'd ask, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against the solid warmth of his chest. "Only that it took so long to find you," she'd whisper, leaning into his strength while watching moonlight paint silver paths through the pine trees that had witnessed their beginning. They both carried scars from their previous lives, some visible and others hidden in places that only intimacy could reach. But those wounds had led them to each other and to the family they'd chosen to build from the wreckage of their separate pasts. Jake grew taller and more confident, his art more sophisticated, his questions about the world more complex, as he began to understand that his family's story was different from those of his classmates, but no less valid or valuable. He knew his parents had been in danger once, knew they'd been brave to protect each other and him, but the details remained age-appropriately vague, filed away for conversations that would come when Jake was older and ready to understand the full complexity of his family's origins. For now, it was enough that they were together, safe and committed to staying that way no matter what challenges the future might present. On quiet Sunday mornings, the three of them would hike the same trails where Marcus had first found Eleanor broken and hiding, where their story had begun with fear and violence, but had transformed into something beautiful through patience and love. Now she walked confidently beside him, pointing out wildlife to Jake, sketching interesting rock formations and cloud patterns, no longer running from anything but moving toward a future. They were building together one shared experience at a time. The forest that had once harbored deadly secrets now witnessed their healing, season after season of growth and renewal that proved redemption was possible even for people who'd done terrible things for necessary reasons. The pine trees that had sheltered Elena during her darkest hours now provided shade for family picnics. The clearings where Marcus had fought for their lives now echoed with Jake's laughter and Elena's gentle teaching as she helped him identify edible plants and animal tracks. The carving knife rested in its place of honor on their mantelpiece, transformed from weapon to tool to symbol of everything they'd overcome and chosen to build together. Sometimes Jake would ask to hold it, tracing the initials carved into the handle with small fingers that already showed artistic promise inherited from both his parents. "Tell me again how you and Mom met," he'd ask, settling between them on the couch for the story that had become family legend and bedtime ritual. Marcus and Elena would exchange glances full of shared understanding, editing carefully as they recounted the tale of the princess, who wasn't really a princess, and the woodcarver, who wasn't really just a woodcarver, who found each other in a forest where secrets grew like wildflowers and love bloomed as unexpectedly as mountain laurel after the harshest winter on record. Their version emphasized courage and kindness, the importance of helping people in trouble, the way families could form from choice as much as blood, leaving the darker details for adult conversations held in whispers after their son had gone to sleep. The morning mist still clung to Cedar Falls like secrets, but now they were the kind of secrets families keep together. Surprise birthday parties and hidden Christmas presents, and quiet moments of perfect contentment that didn't need words to be complete and meaningful. Marcus Williams had learned that sometimes the most important battles weren't fought with weapons, but with trust, patience, and the courage to let broken people heal in their own time and their own way. Elena had discovered that home wasn't a place you were born, but a choice you made every day, a commitment to stay and fight for something worth protecting even when leaving would be easier and safer. Their story had begun with violence and fear, desperation, and the kind of dangers that destroyed most people who encountered them. But it continued with art and laughter, with Jake's drawings covering every surface of their rebuilt home and Elena's paintings brightening rooms that had once been too empty and too quiet. Marcus's carvings grew more beautiful as his hands remembered how to create instead of destroy, channeling decades of training and discipline into artistic expression that brought joy rather than death. They were no longer the hunter and the hunted, no longer the soldier and the victim, but simply a family who had chosen each other despite everything that should have kept them apart, proving that love really could bloom in the most unexpected places, taking root so deeply in mountain soil and human hearts that nothing could uproot it again.